Coming up on Arirang News, the itinerary for South Korean President Yoon-Yeol's week-long trip to the United States for a summit with President Joe Biden is taking shape. The Yoon-Biden summit, business meetings, and Yoon's speech at Congress are drawing much attention among the other key events. Secondary batteries are one of South Korea's crucial strategic assets along with chips. To secure a super gap in the sector and maintain a leading position in the global market, President Yoon vows the government's full support. Local transmissions of Mpox are on the rise in South Korea, with the total number of confirmed cases reaching 20. 2 more have been reported today with no recent overseas travel history. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in South Korea. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. We start with the upcoming 7-day trip to the U.S. by South Korean President Yoon-Yeol. The itinerary for his state visit, marking the two countries' 70-year-old alliance, is taking shape. And among key events, the Yoon-Biden summit, business meetings, and Yoon's speech at Congress are drawing much attention. Our Kim Do-yeon leads our coverage tonight.
President Yoon jets off to Washington, D.C. next Monday for a state visit, hosted by U.S. President Joe Biden. This is the first state visit by a sitting South Korean president in 12 years, and according to the first deputy director of the National Security Office on Thursday, the two presidents are set to meet on multiple occasions.
President Yoon and President Biden will spend a long time together through multiple events, including the White House's official welcoming ceremony, the summit, and state dinner, and will congratulate each other for the success of the bilateral alliance of 70 years and exchange views of its future advancement.
Yoon's schedule so far shows that the summit will not be the first time the two meet, as Biden has invited Yoon for a reception on Tuesday evening, the day before Wednesday's summit. On Thursday, Yoon will address Congress on liberal democracy and share his blueprint for the future of the bilateral alliance. The speech will be followed by lunch at the State Department, hosted by U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris and State Secretary Antony Blinken. A briefing by top U.S. military officials on the global situation is also to take place on that day. Before returning to Seoul, he'll stop by Boston to meet academics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology while also hosting a panel session at Harvard University's Kennedy School on Economic Freedom and Liberal Democracy. The Deputy Director of the National Security Office says he expects the summit to ramp up the defense readiness of the two countries while further solidifying the extended deterrence. He added that economic security cooperation will strengthen, especially regarding supply chain issues. And lastly, the summit will set the basis for stronger support of exchanges among future generations from the two countries.
These are a few expected results from the summit, but the most important aspect is the reaffirming that the bilateral alliance's history and the present are based on the shared values of the two countries.
This will be the 6th time President Yoon meets President Biden since taking office last May, and it comes while there are a number of significant issues. Security issues regarding North Korea's increased missile provocations and the prolonged war in Ukraine. Economic issues regarding the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act and Chips and Science Act. While different results will come from the two leaders' talks, the most significant, according to an official at the presidential office, will be decided by the people. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Earlier this week, the U.S. government shortened the list of car models that are eligible for tax benefits under its Inflation Reduction Act. leaving out models of Korean automakers Hyundai and Kia, as well as other foreign companies. Attention now turns to what could be discussed between Presidents Yoon and Biden regarding the issue during their upcoming summit. Our trade correspondent Shin Ha-young reports.
The U.S. Inflation Reduction Act has emerged as one of the key agenda items for the South Korea-U.S. summit. Earlier this week, under the final assembly requirements in North America, the U.S. shortened its list of EV models eligible for tax incentives. South Korean auto giants Hyundai and Kia were both left out. This leaves huge concerns over South Korean companies, as their U.S. counterparts will have a head start in the global EV market. But one expert says this could be seen as an opportunity.
It's a good chance for South Korea, as global automakers now have to compete only based on the quality of their products. We have an advantage over global competitors, as South Korean electric cars have been recognized by the global market, with winning 3 awards this year.
South Korean EV battery makers will also be paying attention to the summit, with concerns that they would have to change their current manufacturing processes. The uncertainty has been substantially relieved as a subsidy of $3,750 is given when more than 40% of the key minerals are either mined or processed in the U.S. or FTA countries, which South Korea is part of. But there are still some uncertainties.
Since we don't have enough resources, we can't extract the major minerals for battery production. The latest requirements imply that even if South Korea processes those minerals, it can still qualify for tax credits. However, uncertainty still lingers as the details of tax incentives for automakers have not been announced yet.
With the remaining uncertainties in mind, the government may convey its concern and stance during the summit with President Biden.
It is important to secure a time extension until South Korea can reduce its dependence on Chinese minerals for batteries. It would also be great if the government could convey that there is a contradiction between the Inflation Reduction Act and the Free Trade Agreement, as it could amount to discrimination against a product manufactured outside the U.S.
Meanwhile, more than 100 business leaders will be accompanying President Yoon next week for his trip to the U.S. And Presidential Secretary for Economic Affairs hinted at the possibility of addressing the Inflation Reduction Act if the two leaders feel the need for comprehensive cooperation measures. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
And with the U.S. trying to exclude China from the supply chains, another key economic issue between Seoul and Washington involves semiconductors, as much of South Korean chip makers' production takes place in China. Our Moon Hae-ryun has more.
The future of the chip industry is going to be made in America.
During next week's bilateral summit between the leaders of South Korea and the U.S., discussions on Washington's CHIPS and Science Act are expected to take place in order to address some of its rules and uncertainties for South Korean chip makers. The act was signed into law in August last year as part of President Biden's plan to foster semiconductor production and research in the United States, after disruption in the supply chain during COVID-19 left the production of electronic goods dwindling and costs rising. The bill provides $39 billion towards funding manufacturing incentives. And according to the U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, as of last week, more than 200 companies have expressed their interest in grants. Currently, 3/4 of global semiconductor production takes place in East Asia. Samsung Electronics dominates the market share for DRAM chips, followed by SK Hynix. And according to market research company TrendForce, the two companies combined had a market share of 72.8% in DRAM sales. With the grant and loans available through the CHIPS Act, Samsung Electronics could cover up to $5.95 billion of its $17 billion investment in building its Texas plant. So what's stopping them from applying? The Korea Economic Research Institute published a report last Friday to highlight 4 rules from the CHIPS and Science Act that would need to be addressed. Of these, the greatest issue would be the limitation on the expansion and new construction of facilities in countries of concern listed by the US, China in particular. Nearly half of DRAM chips from SK Hynix and 40% of flash memory chips from Samsung Electronics are produced in China.
Of course, the semiconductor market will grow bigger in the future, and companies would have had plans to increase production capacity in their facilities in China as a result. So it's true that there are now restrictions preventing that.
Another area of concern is the one-year reprieve on export restrictions on semiconductor machinery to China, as it is due to expire in October this year. Whether these issues can be resolved with a satisfactory conclusion for both parties during the summit remains to be seen. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
The faces of the Korean war heroes will light up New York's Times Square for 2 weeks during President Yoon-Bid's state visit to the U.S. The Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs announced on Thursday that a 30-second video honoring 10 notable U.S. and South Korean war veterans will be aired on 2 electronic billboards, marking the 70th anniversary of the alliance. Run by Samsung Electronics and LG Electronics, the video will be played 680 times a day from this Thursday through May 3rd. The 10 heroes chosen by the ministry and the South Korea-U.S. Combined Forces Command include General Douglas MacArthur and General Baek Sun-yup, who are widely known for their leadership in pivotal battles of the Korean War. Responding to Moscow, Seoul's top office has defended earlier remarks by President Yoon in an interview where he mentioned extending aid for Ukraine, saying those were hypothetical and Seoul's stance depends on Moscow's future actions. Our Oh Soo-young has the latest.
It's an obvious answer to a purely hypothetical question. South Korea's top office says the country's policy of sending aid to Ukraine depends on Russia's actions and the scale of impact on citizens, with the war now having raged on for over 13 months. This comes after the Kremlin on Thursday warned any arms delivery to Ukraine is a hostile act and could endanger bilateral relations with Moscow in an angry response to President Yoon-Bid's interview that hinted South Korea may broaden its support to Kyiv upon serious large-scale war atrocities. A senior official at Yoon's office addressed Moscow's reaction, telling reporters that the president had made a principled common-sense remark based on a hypothetical scenario. Thus, to flip the question, he said, Seoul's assistance to Ukraine would rest on Moscow's future actions, stressing the government has not changed its policy of sending only humanitarian and financial aid to Ukraine. The official highlighted how Yoon has said Seoul will take appropriate measures whilst considering relations with Moscow and the scale of harm caused to civilians. Still, given South Korea's history of receiving international support after the 1950-53 Korean War, the official said the country is committed to endorsing the freedom of the Ukrainian people and helping rebuild their nation. Russian officials had also warned weapons aid to Ukraine could affect the Kremlin's position on the Korean Peninsula's security environment, with the former president suggesting Moscow sends advanced weapons to North Korea. Regarding Moscow and Beijing's reaction to Yoon's interview, where he also said Seoul opposes a forceful change to the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. Yoon's officials said South Korea and China will actively expand talks and cooperation based on mutual respect and reciprocity, if they keep to global norms and respect the rules of the international community, despite having different political systems. Russia cannot be an exception to such rules, the official added. Yoon's office says South Korea has been providing more active support to Kyiv compared to last year and consulting with the United States, although the question of expanding aid is currently not on the table for the summit between Presidents Yoon and Biden in DC next week. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
South Korea's foreign ministry has strongly condemned China's remarks about President Yoon's earlier comments on Taiwan. In a statement on Thursday, the ministry said that China's foreign ministry spokesperson has made a serious diplomatic discourtesy that calls into question China's national dignity. In an interview with Reuters on Wednesday, President Yoon said tensions in Taiwan occurred due to forceful attempts to change the status quo and voiced opposition to such much change. He also stressed that the issue is beyond that of China and Taiwan, as it is a global matter. In response to Yoon's remarks, China's foreign ministry strongly criticized the comments and said it will not permit others to meddle in the matter. South Korea is home to some of the world's leading secondary battery makers, but with global competition heating up, watchers say there's no guarantee they won't fall behind. Against this backdrop, to secure super gap in the sector to maintain a leading position in the global market, President Yoon vows the government's full support. Our Han Sung-woo has the details.
South Korean President Yoon has pledged that his administration will fully support the nation's secondary battery industry so that it doesn't fall behind its global competitors in what he called today's industry wars.
2차 전지 산업은 기술 혁신이 가장 활발하게 일어나고 있는 분야입니다. 성능과 안전성을 획기적으로 높이는 기술 혁신으로 우리의 경쟁력과 초격차를 유지해야 됩니다.
On Thursday, during a national strategy meeting on the matter at the former Blue House presidential complex, President Yoon said secondary batteries, along with semiconductors, are at the core of South Korea's strategic assets and stressed that the technology's importance will only grow as nations worldwide compete for technological hegemony.
탄소 중립 시대 전기차의 동력이자 디지털 전환을 위한 핵심 열쇠입니다.
He called on the public and private sectors to work together as one team so that the country remains on top of its battery game. In particular, the leader brought up the need to diversify the nation's supply network of key minerals and other materials, and reduce the costs of procuring them. Among the roughly 70 people present for Thursday's meeting were executives from top Korean battery firms, related ministers, scholars, and analysts. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
The ruling People Power Party, the government, and the civilian sector agreed that a hike in energy prices is inevitable, but did not specify a timeline for the increase. This is at a policy discussion meeting held on Thursday to hear opinions from different civilian sectors that are for and against price hikes. Despite differences in opinions, the parties involved together vowed to work towards making a proposal that the households, customers, and industries can all accept. Meanwhile, the chief policymaker of the PPP, Park Tae-chul, deplored the lack of response from KEPCO and the Korea's Gas Corporation, despite repeated calls for their restructuring to offset their accumulating deficit. In other news, half portions at restaurants and refill stations for daily necessities is part of the latest trend of small spending. Such options reduce the cost of living burden as well as allowing consumers to reduce waste. Lee Eun-jin has the story.
This is a snack bar in Seoul. What's unique on this menu is a half serving of tteokbokki. This idea of a half portion was first added 2 years ago, and so far, customers seem satisfied.
The small serving allows me to try different things.
More people looking for such half portions has helped sales for this snack bar. Now, this is a zero-waste store, where their motto of not producing waste has been attracting customers. This store allows customers to only buy as much as they need, with products ranging from shampoo, detergent, and soaps to food items like pasta and condiments. As disposable containers are not used, the store can keep prices low.
Buying 300 grams of shampoo at the refill station is around 40% cheaper than when buying the whole product.
Such refill stations are seeing high demand, particularly among young people living alone. Small spending not only reduces waste, but it also lessens the burden of the cost of living. The option to buy smaller amounts also gives customers the benefit of trying a wider variety of selections. This latest trend addresses both issues of inflation and environmental pollution.
A big factor contributing to this trend is the worsening economic hardship, but it is also closely related to more awareness and interest in environmental protection.
The trend of small consumption and small spending is helping reduce waste. But the growing demand for such smaller portions also suggests that people are suffering from soaring prices. 이은진, Arirang News.
2 more people in South Korea have been confirmed with Mpox on Thursday, bringing the country's total now to 20. Both patients are South Korean nationals, one living in Gyeonggi-do province and the other in Chungcheongbuk-do province. The Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency says neither had recently been abroad. The latest 15 infections that were confirmed since early April were locally transmitted, meaning none had traveled overseas recently. The KDCA says that there is a low chance of the disease being transmitted from using swimming pools or other common facilities. In Yemen, a stampede at an event to distribute financial aid late Wednesday had killed at least 78 people and injured more than 300. Chung Eun-ju has the details.
At least 78 people have been killed and more than 300 injured in a stampede in the Yemeni capital, Sana'a. According to the main television news outlet run by Yemen's Iran-aligned Houthi movement early on Thursday, 13 were in a critical situation and the number of casualties is expected to grow. The Houthi-controlled Ministry of Interior spokesman said in a statement that the stampede happened late on Wednesday during the distribution of charitable donations made by merchants to mark the final days of Ramadan. Hundreds of people had crowded into a school to receive the donations, which amounted to 5,000 Yemeni riyals, or about $9 per person. Wealthy people and businessmen often hand out cash and food, especially to the poor during Ramadan. The Interior Ministry also said in a separate statement that the 2 merchants responsible for organizing the donation event had been detained and an investigation was underway. A spokesman for the ministry blamed the crush on the random distribution of funds without coordination with local officials. The Houthis said they would pay some $2,000 in compensation to each family who lost a relative, while the injured would get around $400. Yemen's capital has been under the control of the Iranian-backed Houthis since 2014, when they removed the country's internationally recognized government. That led to the intervention of a Saudi-led coalition a year later. In recent years, the conflict has turned into a proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia. More than 150,000 people, including fighters and civilians, have been killed in the conflict, which has created what the UN has described as one of the world's worst humanitarian disasters. According to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, more than 21 million people in Yemen, or 2/3 of the country's population, need assistance and protection. Chung Eun-ju, Arirang News.
This coming Saturday, April 22nd, marks the annual Earth Day, and South Korea's Environment Ministry has declared that April 21st to the 27th is a special week to raise awareness about environmental change. On the day of April 22nd, South Korea's government buildings and local landmarks such as the Sungnae-mun Gate, Gwangan Bridge, and Hwasong Fortress will turn their lights off for 10 minutes starting from 8 p.m. By doing so, 53 tons of freon gas, equivalent to the amount of carbon absorbed by 8,000 30-year-old pine trees in 1 year, will be reduced. It has been 53 years since Earth Day was created in response to the environmental crisis triggered by the 1969 Santa Barbara oil spill accident in California, the United States.
The entire nation will see breezy spring-like conditions for tomorrow. First, Seoul highs will be in the similar range with maximum temperatures reaching 22 degrees. For the south, the unseasonable heat will taper off and readings will be in the early 20s for the daytime. Temperatures will drop drastically for Daegu from 30 to 20 degrees tomorrow. Dusty conditions will make a return again. This is due to the combination of fine dust particles and yellow dust flowing in from overseas. Finest levels will be especially high for Gangwon-do and parts of Gyeongsang-buk-do provinces. Other regions, including Gyeonggi-do province and parts of the south, will see air quality in the bad category. Tomorrow, Seoul and Daejeon will be starting off at 12 degrees. Central regions will see wide temperature gaps with highs jumping significantly. Seoul will get up to 22 degrees, Gwangju 25, and Busan will only make it to 19 degrees. Next Tuesday, another round of nationwide rain is in the forecast. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all for this Thursday night's newscast. Thank you for watching. We'll be back with the most up-to-date news tomorrow. Have a lovely night.
안녕하세요. 안녕하세요.